presentation. Okay, welcome everybody to our July Memory Fox webinar. I am personally so thrilled to host Rachel Zant for this webinar this month. I think we connected maybe even a few months. I think initially we connected like last December, and then we got back in contact a couple months ago. You had like this fabulous idea of talking about interviewing and how to like really conduct a really great interview, especially with ethical considerations and just getting those emotions out of people. And I'm so excited to see what you're going to present to us today.
Me too.
Yeah, thanks for having me, or thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
And for everybody that is here and everybody that registered, I'll be sending out the recording within 24 hours, as well as any resources that are mentioned during the session today. Anything else that you might need, I'll put that in the email that comes out after the session. And additionally, if anybody on the call is interested in learning specifically about Memory Fox, at the end of the session, I'm actually going to go ahead and do just a quick demo. So anybody that's interested, go ahead and stick around. I would love to chat with you about it. But for now, I would love to pass it over to Rachel. Please go ahead and kick us off.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So first, I'm just going to try this share screen thing that we all love and just make sure that works with my presentation. Okay, so can you see my Authentic Conversations title page?
Yes, I can.
Amazing. Okay, so thank you everybody for being here. I'm really thrilled and excited to talk about this. This is something I'm very passionate about, how to tell great stories in an authentic way, how to tell more stories that have more feeling and emotion in them, because I really believe that's going to help you raise more money for your nonprofit organization. So quick little bit about me. My name is Rachel Zant, and I have a company called Pen with a Purpose. I mostly do copywriting and some direct response consulting for nonprofits, and I've been telling great stories and helping nonprofits raise more money for more than 20 years. So that's just a really quick little bit about me. Okay, so I love this quote. I want to start with this just to really start us off, that we're going to be talking a lot about authenticity, and that authenticity and telling great stories is a choice that you make every day for your organization and for yourself. You can choose if you want to share yourself, be honest, tell stories that are true and that really matter, or do you want to just sort of be surface and professional and businesslike and not really show your true self, both personally and professionally? And I really believe that that's tied. Both things are very much tied together. Now, I actually wanted to just quickly tell you a story. I think about this in terms of when I was younger, I was pretty shy, introverted. I still am. And one day I was walking down the street and I sort of just remember making this choice to make eye contact with people. And that was scary. And I think that can be scary for a lot of people. That's just one example of when you're walking down the street, you can choose to kind of look away and not acknowledge the people that are around you, or you can choose to make eye contact and smile and risk that there might be a little bit of rejection in that, but also that there's a possibility someone's going to smile back and you're going to feel a connection with them. Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out my clicking here. Okay, so here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what stories should you tell, how do you find good stories, talk about some interview tips and techniques, and then kind of how to use that interview content into creating a compelling appeal. A lot of my samples are going to be direct mail examples, but I want to reiterate that you can do this in email, you can do this in social media, on your website, but just because I have a lot of great sort of looking examples to share with direct mail. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to include your donor in the conversation, whether it's appeals or social media or whatever it might be. And there's going to be lots of examples throughout. And then we'll go have some questions. There should be about 10, 15 minutes for questions at the end. So try to hold them. If there's something burning, I'm sure Carly can interrupt me. Okay, so let's talk about what story should you tell, right? I always get this questions like, what story, who should sign my letter, who should share the story, and how do I find stories? Now, I know a lot of organizations, your executive director or your CEO is often the main voice for your stories. But I want you to think about what, first of all, like, what are you gathering stories for? What is the purpose? That's my pen with a purpose is that name for a reason, because I always want to think about what the purpose is of what I'm writing. So, oh, here's my lovely cat, Ron. Hello, say hi, everybody. He's gonna keep jumping up here and hopefully not step all over my screen. So are you asking, are you asking for a donation? Are you asking someone to take action, to sign something or do something? Different stories you can use for that versus thanking or reporting, right? Thanking, you might be sharing a completed story, but asking, you might want something that has a little bit more of a need or it hasn't yet come to fruition. So think about that, right? And be really clear in each piece that you write, you should know the main purpose of that. So many times I read letters that people have written, charities have, and they want it to ask for money, but more than anything, they're thanking or they're reporting, and they're not actually getting to asking. So this makes a difference in the kind of story that you're looking for. And then I really want you to think about what's the best perspective. Like I said, is your CEO always, or executive director, is that always the best perspective to share the stories of your organization? I did an entire presentation on this at the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference, where I really got into this. I'm going to just do a brief overview here. Have I been muted this entire time? Oh dear, that's terrible. Okay, well, we're
No,
gonna
you
just,
have not.
oh, I have not, okay, I just
Yep, you're
suddenly
all
felt,
set.
someone just asked me to unmute and I was like, oh gosh, I've not been muted this whole time. Okay, thank goodness, I just put out a heart attack. Okay, so let's think about this from an organizational perspective. So let's think about your donor. I just want to bring attention to my amazing design skills here with these slides. I am not a designer, but think about your donor walking into your organization and what are the different perspectives you would like them to see? Who would you maybe want them to talk to? What different parts of your organization are important for them to know about? I'm going to give one example of a hospital foundation here, right? So a patient could give them a great perspective, or a doctor, a researcher, right? A nurse. There's lots of different areas. If it's an animal shelter, it might be a cruelty officer or an animal control officer. The vet would have a different perspective, an animal, a donor, or even another adopter. So think about perspectives of how you might tell the story to your donor and give them a well-rounded view of your organization. That's one way to think about it. Another way to think about that is now you've got your story. So say it's a hospital, you've got your patient, got your patient story. What are some other perspectives of that patient story that would bring that to life, right? What would the family members say about that patient and the experience that they had at the hospital? Or again, the nurse who cared for them. Also, the piece of equipment. We're going to get to this later, but use your imagination. Like, what would a piece of equipment have to say about the story of this patient who was treated at the hospital? A technician or even another donor. Like, what is the donor perspective? So this gives you just a really great place to start identifying stories and identifying people that you might be able to talk to, because that's going to be the next step, is starting to talk to these people and identify their stories and figure out what they have to say and how they can tell the donor what their gift is going to do and how their gift is really important. I'm just going to take a really quick sip of water. Okay, so let's dive into interview tips and techniques. For me, I really want to make this point over and over again. A really good interview needs trust and rapport. And I have some amazing interviews with people, and people do ask, how can you get such great content from these interviews? And it's because I work really hard to establish trust and rapport with the people that I'm speaking to. Try to set that call up right from the get-go. Be clear. How long is it going to be? I call it a chat. I don't call it an interview because interview makes us all think of job interviews or something very formal. So you say, hey, I'd love to have a quick chat, or would you be open to a conversation? A format. We've had a few questions about this in terms of format, and often I'll have clients say, can we just shoot them an email with a bunch of questions and let them answer on their own time? I always say no, if at all possible, because people edit themselves when they write. But when you have a conversation on phone or by video, people are just more loose and spontaneous, and they're not editing themselves in their head as much. I can always tell people that you're going to let them review the content afterwards, so that's really important. But I always say I want this conversational tone, because direct mail, you want it to be conversational. So I want to hear the personal conversational tone. Record it also so you can focus, and you can get a AI transcript done up, and you can get all of that content, and you don't have to be writing notes, right? You can just focus, be present. I always say to look for moments of connection, right? And be yourself. Like, it's a conversation. So I'm telling people, oh, wow, I have a daughter as well. Or, wow, that, that feels really important. Or just little things that make you feel connected to the conversation are important. And always build in extra time, because we don't want this to feel rushed. You don't want to feel like you're cutting somebody off right in the moment when they're really opening up to you. So just always build in extra time if you can. I always take interviews too as moments of connection and feelings. So I'm not asking for facts. I don't want someone to be listing out the dates and times and details of things, because I can get that in an email later, or I can read that in a program write-up, right? So I say, how did it make you feel? What makes you angry? Program stuff. What keeps you up at night? What keeps you up at night if you didn't get this money? What inspires you about the work that you do, right? So questions about feeling. And questions about impact. I ask beneficiaries, how do donors, or sorry, I ask people who work with the organization, how do donors directly impact the work you do each day? Or for beneficiaries, how has this organization directly impacted your life? I always ask, what would you say to a lower value donor, someone who gives $25 or $50 a year even, to show that what the impact that they have on the work you do or on your life? And people tell you really amazing things. I always ask if people can share a story, because this is where you get more stories, and this is where you get your stories. So always ask people to share a story that illustrates how they're feeling or the impact. Or who or what has most impacted you or inspired you from this organization. I'm going to share a really quick example of how much of a difference an interview can make. So this was a program write-up from one of my clients. I'm not even going to read it out, and you can quickly scan it, but it basically, I didn't understand what the program did after reading this. So I said, could I speak to the program director? And within an hour of having a conversation with this woman, she told me this heart-wrenching story about a 13-year-old girl who had been abused and trafficked by her own parents, and the amazing journey that this child went through in order to be healed, and what this organization did. So I'll show you. From that program description, this was the start of a lift letter. I'm going to read it out to you so you don't have to. Dear loving friend, it's always in the eyes. The eyes tell the story of the soul. When I first looked into Alicia's eyes, they were lifeless. She looked like a cute little 13-year-old girl, but she was sitting on the chair in front of me with her shoulders hunched, her body curled in to protect itself. So that gives you a feeling. Which one do you think is more impactful? Writing a letter with that program description or writing something like this that gives you this feeling of this person who really needs our help? And I'm going to share the rest of this appeal in a moment. But first, I want to get back to some more interview questions. So This absolutely is my number one top tip. I know I said I want you to connect with people when you're talking with them, but also you really need to just be quiet and listen and keep your heart open and listen for those moments of connection. So many times I listen to interview recordings or I read transcripts, and the interviewer is talking more than the person being interviewed because they feel nervous. And they try to fill the silence. But sometimes a key to a really good interview is just trying to be quiet and listen and let them speak. The very best question for last seems simple, but here it is. I have gotten some entire story content for letters based on this. So just make sure you build in extra time, a good 5 minutes, 10 minutes, because people feel comfortable. You've been having your conversation, you've gone through all of your questions, and they're like, oh, okay, I feel good about this. Like, this is almost over. And they tell you things and they share things that you might not have thought of. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. Now, sometimes I know we got some questions about this. Sometimes some people just don't seem to want to open up, and you're still just not getting anything from these interviews or conversations. And I've had it. It is often CEOs, executive directors, doctors, people who are used to being mostly in their head and are very factual. So in those types of situations, I recommend setting them up for success or trying to say what you want them to say and see if they'll agree with that. Like, if I was in your shoes, I'd be feeling this, or, does this sound how you felt? Or can I say perhaps that you might have been feeling this, and just sort of try and set them up with that feeling statement. Or you can also go a completely different direction and really go into using your imagination, which we will get into in a little bit. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about feelings because they are hard for some people. It's hard to get into feelings. So I just always want to reiterate that the reason people are giving to you and to your organization is because they feel something, right? They might be remembering somebody that they lost or someone they love, or the act of giving makes them feel good. We just don't know really the motivations why somebody's giving, but often it really has to do with feelings, right? So feelings are important, but they're also scary, right? We all have a hard time with feelings. So like most of us, like I am a very feelings person, and still like they're scary. Sometimes we just don't want to feel things and we don't want to connect with other people, or they make us feel vulnerable or out of control or unprofessional, right? However, I think it's really important that here we go, that you tap into your feelings and you think about how you're feeling, right? So maybe just take a moment right now to think about how you're feeling right in this moment, because I just don't believe that you can, in an interview or when you're writing a letter, if you are not able to feel your own feelings and tap into your own feelings, you're not going to be able to tap into that for your letters. So just take a little deep breath and see if you can put in the chat, or just sit there for a minute yourself and just name how you're feeling right now. There are a lot of different feelings that you could be feeling. This is a feelings wheel. We've got our basic ones in the middle here. And then as you fan out, there's so many different angles and nuances to feelings, right? So just keep that in mind as you're writing and as you're kind of thinking about how you feel. Like, try and tap down in there. Total side note, we just went and saw Inside Out 2 last night, and that's another great example, if anyone's seen it, of feelings and how they can just impact us so much in our actions, and they can be scary. But I love that scene where everyone was hugging, the group hug, and it's like, it's okay to have all these different feelings. Okay, so how do we bring this all into creating an appeal? So you've identified some different people you want to talk to, you started to talk to them, you've found a story, for instance, in the case of the 13-year-old girl. How do you turn that into an effective appeal? So I'm going to dive into examples now to show you how we can do that and how I have done that in the past, and hopefully it will give you some sparks of inspiration. So what we did in this particular case was created what's called a lift note from the program director, who was Cindy, who told the story of Alicia. I'm going to read out some pieces, so don't feel like you have to read this. So I had read you the intro of that letter, and then she went in to say, I'm not going to tell you it was an easy road. There were many ups and downs as we worked with Alicia. But I recently received a photo from Alicia's aunt. She was dressed in a fancy prom dress, smiling from ear to ear. And her eyes, they were filled with life. Because you remember at the beginning, her eyes had no life. So it was just such a poignant, beautiful example of how this young girl went from 13 years old being abused to spending time with this organization and this office. And they worked with the police and they got justice. And she went and she moved with her aunt. And she has a life now, and that's a beautiful story. And this program director was able to tell this story and share all the different steps that the organization went through in order to help her. And I want to point out here that she still checks in with this young girl as she's growing up. She doesn't see her as often, but also that the donor is brought into the story, right? This is what you have done for Alicia through your gift. Thank you for helping to put the spark of life back into Alicia's eyes. And then there's a beautiful picture of Cindy as well, and her signature. Excuse me, and then a PS as well. And I want to note the name and details changed to protect the privacy at the bottom because she did not share this girl's name. We changed identifying details in the story, but the core feeling was there. Then we included an ask note, a little more program specific note from the co-founder, Pat. So Pat has the specific ask in there, the tangible ask tied to the donor's last gift. Your gift of X or X will help us open another children's anti-exploitation program office. Very specific. A single office serves over 500 at-risk children a year. That's 500 more children you can help from save from sexual abuse and trafficking with your gift today. I also want to point out there's another perspective in here, just adding to the argument and adding to the case of how important this office is. A social worker from the Children's Hospital says, when we refer children into the CAP program, crisis aid response right away, I haven't seen any of the children we refer into the program come back through the system. That's success. So that's 3 different perspectives just in this one appeal. Then we also included a reply form. And I just want to point out these little handwritten touches, right? Even with Pat, he's got a handwritten note at the bottom. And on the reply form, there's a handwritten note and there's a handwritten return address from Pat. And those are all his handwriting. We had him write it out and just put it on the appeal. So that's one example. I'm going to jump into another one here from an organization called Canteen in Australia. I did a whole presentation about this organization, and in Australia, they do multiple waves of appeals sharing different perspectives of the same story. So this example, I interviewed a young man named Jacob who lost his mom at the age of 13, and Canteen helps young people impacted by cancer. Either they have cancer or one of their loved ones has cancer. In this case, his mom passed away. And when I talked to him, I also have a young son who's 12, so this story really impacted me thinking about my son losing his mom. And he told me about this and how devastating that was, obviously. But then to add to it, he was bullied. You know, I felt sad, lost, and alone. But then the dark days after my mom passed, the people who I thought were my friends turned out to be not so kind. It actually was, they were bullies, like they were horrible. And so Canteen was provided this space for him to find some relief and find out that he was okay and to make friends. So in this appeal, we did this beautiful photo album, and it told all these stories with all these photos, and it was beautiful. And then in the appeal, we also included a more factual insert that had more details about this one program called Good Grief that Jacob said had really helped him to process these feelings of grief from losing his mom and feel like he wasn't alone because he met other people in this program who also had lost their parents. And then we included this little word search. And on the bottom, you might notice there's a little green strip where the donor, when they send their gift back, can write some of their own values on there. So it's an involvement piece, which includes the donor, which I'm going to get into as well in a little bit here. Then the second letter that we sent out was more of a reminder letter. It was from Jacob's dad. So I also interviewed Jacob's dad, and it was a different perspective of what it's like losing your wife, but also trying to help your son. Well, he had 3 sons go through this. Jacob was his youngest. As a parent, he says, there's some things you just can't give your kids, especially when they're teenagers. Even though you might want to desperately take away their pain, it's not as easy as when they were little. Again, I could really empathize with the story because I'm mom, I have a child who's 12, and when I talk to them, I felt this, I empathize, and I was able to build this appeal based on those feelings. But then tie in that the donor is the person who gave Jacob what he needed during the most painful time of his life. And then there's an ask again. You can help another young person going through one of the very worst times of their life. And we also included a great lift note in this, which was an email from the person who ran that Good Grief program. And she tells this amazingly beautiful story about a leaving ceremony that they do, which I will read out for you. And I think I need to put my glasses on. The honoring ceremony. So she says, on Saturday, staff set up a beautiful, peaceful spot for young people to sit and write a letter to their loved ones. The letter gave young people the space to talk to their loved ones, tell them about the things they miss about them, update on what's going in their life, and express anything they feel they didn't get a chance to say before they died. So they're writing this beautiful letter to their loved ones. And then they walk down to the beach and they put these letters in the water and they release them out. And it gets me so emotional. And they dissolve in the water and it helps them to process their feelings and release them out. So sharing that story with donors just gives them such a beautiful example of what their gift does. In a way that they wouldn't know if you didn't share that story. And then I'll point out again, all these sticky notes are more quotes from young people who've been helped by this program. So just layers and layers of ways that you can add all these different perspectives to tell the story of your organization. Here's another example that I interviewed someone in a little small theater company. So again, she was struggling with how do we tell the story of this theater? How do we explain to people why we need their gift? And I was like, can I just have a conversation? And I just talked to her about this. And just through this half an hour conversation, she was able to share with me why the theater company needed the money was because they put on these amazing shows and the ticket prices just don't cover it. And the founders of the organization were so passionate and had such a love of theater. And she knew that the donors also shared this passion and this love for theater. So that's why it leads. Thanks for your love of exceptional theater. Right? And then perhaps like our passionate creative founders, you love being drawn into the magic of a powerful story. It's creating a connection with the donor and some shared values. And then I just want to point out here, we found out through this interview that they needed to raise another $120,000 for the show. We knew how many people approximately were going to get the appeal. Doing the math, it turned out if every person that read the letter gave just $35, that would be enough. So there's a tangible ask that we worked into this. And this little, the sentence at the very end in brackets, because she was worried that some of her people who buy tickets or who are donors are like starving artists, and she didn't want to offend anybody. So we added this last little sentence in there about if you're not able to financially make a gift, then please don't worry about it. Okay, I feel like I'm rushing through all of this. Hopefully everything's clear. I want to just take a moment and think about imagination. This is another great way. If you're struggling, if you aren't getting great stuff from your interviews, or you need or you want to try something a little different and grab attention in a different way, use your imagination. So this next example I'm going to show you is an example where it was a great appeal. We had a piece of equipment, but in the past I had had an equipment that was about the COVID and helping someone to breathe. It was a ventilator. And at the last minute, that idea got kiboshed, and we had this C-arm, which didn't sound very exciting. Had a conversation with one of the program people who was able to tell me how important it was, but it still just didn't feel like enough. So instead, we thought about what would that operating room sound like without any pieces of equipment running. You know, the first thing I noticed, it was eerily silent. Normally you hear all kinds of hums, clicks, and beeps in an operating room, the telltale kerchunk of an X-ray machine scanning a patient, but not today. So just brings the person in reading in a different way, right? And then urgency. I just got back from an urgent visit to the OR. A vital piece of equipment broke down. We need to replace it ASAP. And this was true. It had broken down. And then go into, I went into what it's called and what it does. And again, I did use this idea of how much it costs and how many donors were getting it. Interestingly, it's $35. That was just a coincidence. So if every person reading this letter gives $35, we could cover the cost. And then when this one, I love this because we included a photo, and this is a great thing that you can do. Include something that looks like a photo, and then it's just a quick little handwritten note from the executive director on the back, right? Casual, but also personal. You can see why it's called a C-arm, right? There's a C there. It really is a critical piece of equipment. Thank you, Jacqueline. Very personal. You can just toss that in as a quick little lift note in your appeals, and that can really make a difference and make it just feel more authentic and a little breathless. Here's an example using illustration and also some testimonials from beneficiaries. But what I want to point out about this is that some of these testimonials from beneficiaries are what we call composites. So they're not an actual quote from an actual person, but a composite of stories that the client had heard over time and created. And then we did illustration to just add a little texture and feeling to the piece. This is a gift catalog. This is the other side of it, just to give you a sense. Like just an example, it's a hug for medical care. And the quote is, after a few visits to the winter warm-up coffee meetings, one of the kind staff people noticed I was squinting a lot, having trouble reading anything. She mentioned that they could get me set up with an eye exam and even help pay for glasses. And now I can finally read again, right? That shows just more impact than just the first little part. With your gift, you can provide a hug in the form of essential medical supplies. So this is using your imagination a little more, creating some composite stories that can add a little bit of texture to your appeals. My quote is not working now. Sorry. Okay, so here's when I was talking about maybe using equipment. Here's an example we did for a hospital foundation for their annual report. And we thought, what if all the different pieces of equipment would thank the donor and tell them what an impact they have? And right on the cover, what about a Band-Aid? The Band-Aid saying, because of you, I'm not just a flexible Band-Aid. And I know I'm not the sort of thing you'd find on the cover of a report, but here we are. Right? You give me the power of healing many humans, right? We're bringing the donor in. And same thing with the incubator, telling a story about Mike and Connie, whose sleepless, worried eyes eagerly scan their tiny sleeping daughter, Jules, cradled inside my warm walls. It's the incubator talking to the donor, right? You and I kept Jules alive until she became strong enough to go home. We healed her, you and I. Feeling emotion, how can the donor not feel connected to that, right? Okay, so how about including your donor in the conversation? This is a really big one and something that I love to do. And I know my friends over at Agents of Good, John Lepp and Jen Love, really love to include your donor as much as possible. This is a conversation. That makes it authentic, right? It's a give and take. You're not just blasting your donor with all this information, you're including them. So what are some ways that you can do that, right? How do you give your donors a chance to speak? Or how do you show them that they're part of this beautiful community? One way you can do that is in a newsletter. Include a donor story in all your newsletters. In this particular example, I interviewed Britter, who's a monthly donor, and she told me a story, and she sent me all these great pictures of her family. And she shared why she gives and what she would say to other donors to encourage them to give. And then we also included a space on the reply form with this newsletter to say, hey, what do you think about this? Right? You're inviting some expression of what do they actually think about it. And not everyone will fill this out, but some people will. And it matters because people know that your donors know that you're listening to them. So in this case, it was a brand new newsletter and we just said, what do you think? Right? You've seen the ornaments at Christmas time often that people will say, hey, write a little message of hope to patients and we'll hang it on the tree. So a way to just bring that a little more full circle is to make sure you share back to your donors in a future newsletter some pictures of those. Let your donors know that you're listening, other people are responding, and you are doing something about it. Also, you can ask your donors to share a story with you, like why they give. For instance, this is an example from Agents of Good. It was an appeal for a seniors home about to fund a music program, told a story. Like sometimes it's not the song that makes you emotional, it's the things that come to your mind when you hear it. And this appeal was all about that music impacted the seniors in this home and they really wanted to fund some more music. But the great thing about this appeal was that Agents of Good asked for the donors to share their favorite song or what is it about a song that makes them feel emotional or brings a memory back for themselves. And people responded. This one, my mother's best loved song was Deep Purple. She would play it on the piano every night while my father was overseas in the war. Her name was Pauline. People are willing to share this beautiful stuff and beautiful stories with you. Or another example is this one. Look how much she wrote. This one says, singing, mom at 98 remembers the lyrics and tunes to many, many songs. And this person just kept writing and writing and added more paper and wrote more. And this appeal apparently did way better, double than what they expected, and got 5 gifts of $1,000. And then St. Pat's turned this into a concert. They took all these songs that people had sent back and created a concert, an event out of it. And in the end, one donor ended up leaving a major gift that funded this entire music program. So it was very beautiful. I also want you to think about including this personal contact, this way for your donors to get a hold of you and let them know that you're willing to listen and willing to be there. In this case, it was a monthly donor invitation, and this is a little personal note from the person that would be their monthly donor contact. And says, I look forward to talking to you. You can also call me anytime. Personal number. Thank you. I've heard of organizations testing putting a personal number in the PS of their appeal letter if someone doesn't feel comfortable leaving their credit card on the reply form that, hey, if you want to call us, feel free, speak to Cindy and she will let you take your gift. And it helps. It just creates, again, more of that feeling of authenticity and connection, that there's another real human on the other end. I feel like I've actually talked really fast here and I've gone a lot quicker than I thought that I would. So we'll just do a quick summary here, all the things that we talked about. So first of all, think about your story focus. What is it that you need to do when you're looking for the stories, right? Who and what do you need to speak with? What's your program need? If you need to write an appeal, right? What is the particular appeal you want to fund? What's your need? And then identify your main character or your perspective. And that's when you can talk to them. And that's when you can start to think, what are some of those other supporting characters or perspectives that you can add to this main story? And then start interviewing, start talking to people, right? Whoever you can, gather as much information and content as you can to share with this or other appeals. Then use your imagination for the rest. Put it all together. Determine who should be your main signer. Other perspectives could be those lift notes. You could do an email follow-up, social media posts, right? An additional follow-up package if you want. And try to really identify some ways in every appeal. How could you include or involve your donor? I want to leave you with this quote that is really meaningful to me, and because all of this work to me is about trust, right? And the more your donors trust you, the more you trust yourself. Trust is built in the small moments. It's the little things, the moment you choose to connect or decide not to connect, to communicate or to remain silent, to be vulnerable or to build a wall. And I understand sometimes we just choose to protect ourselves and we don't decide to be vulnerable or connect or be authentic, and that's okay. Been there, but it does make a really big difference when you take a risk and you try something new and you try to be vulnerable and you try to connect. Speaking of, I do have this Kickstart guide, Direct Mail Connects, guide to writing an authentic direct mail letter. You can scan that or check out my website as well. You can find it there. And I think that's it. I'll just say thanks very much. And I'm happy to answer any questions or have a discussion about any of this. Appreciate it.
Wow, Rachel, everything was so wow. I mean, those examples, it was like you would list one and I'd be like, wow, great idea. Let's start moving on that idea. And then you'd say another one and like, whoa, amazing idea. Let's start like I mean, everything was so creative. And I love how you just like what you said, like use your imagination. Like sometimes we just need to think you
Mhm.
take some time to think creatively and really like think about what's really going to connect with our donors. I loved this presentation. And
Thank you.
I do have questions for you if you're
Okay,
ready.
amazing.
Okay. All right, great. So, awesome. So obviously you gave us a ton of great examples, like I said, but we did have a question during a registration, and this question
Mhm.
comes from Vicky. And Vicky actually asked, do you have any specific storytelling tactics that you would put into an appeal that would engage a lapsed donor?
Yeah, I definitely try to acknowledge that someone's lapsed and that their financial situation may have changed.
Mm.
I also like to think about how that donor came onto your organization in the first place and mention what that might be. So be really targeted and specific, as you know, if it was an event or something like that, right? So I think just the more that you can be personal and acknowledging and targeting somebody, also just recognize that not all lapsed donors would consider themselves lapsed donors, right? Like I guess it depends how lapsed, but I do find acknowledging that you haven't heard from them a while and you miss them. The other thing is lapsed donors can be very good for what's it called? Legacy giving. My
Yeah,
brain right now, right? Because sometimes it can be that their situation, you know, their cash flow is low, but they're still very committed to you and your organization. So finding other touch points and ways and that they might want to share what their passion and their connection is with your organization, I think would be really good.
those are really good tips. Yeah, so basically, yeah, like you're saying, making it a little bit more targeted at exactly, either where you found that, where they first came to you, or just letting them know how much you miss them. That's great advice. I love that.
Yeah, or reconnecting with the reason why they gave in the first place, and maybe even inviting them to share that, right? Like, why was it that you initially um, gave to us, right? So,
Exactly.
mhm.
All right. You talked a little bit about at the beginning. You talked about different perspectives that you could highlight, different voices that have unique stories to share. During registration, we got a question from Angela, and she actually was asking something similar to that. She said, "Are stories from my perspective or are they better from a volunteer?" So I guess
Mhm.
maybe she means, is there an example where a volunteer story might be better than my perspective, or how do
Yeah,
you maybe determine
totally.
that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, there's a ton of it depends in there, right? I mean, it depends how big your organization is. Like you could test some of these things, but also I think anything where you can start to share all of those different perspectives is really great, right? Like how can you give the donor the full perspective of your organization? So
Right.
I don't think anyone is better. Like if a volunteer can share a compelling emotional story about someone that they worked with when at this organization, like a food bank, right? Like food bank volunteers, when
Mhm.
somebody's the person handing out the food, they have amazing stories to share about people that they've met and the impact, and over time how this person's demeanor and everything has changed, every time they come and visit, right? Or so to me it's like,
Yeah.
what's the best story? It's not always who the teller is, it's the story and what is going to share that in the most impactful way with the person that's going to be reading it.
I love that perspective. That's such a good point because a lot of your volunteers do volunteer again and again, right? So they have a totally different perspective from maybe the first year that they volunteered to the fifth year they volunteered, or the fifth event they volunteered for, the fifth time they've handed out food. Oh, that's so
Exactly.
interesting.
Yeah,
That's a good
exactly.
point.
Like as soon as you start talking with people, it's amazing the stories that you hear. And and staff people have different, well, or different perspectives to share over. And some have been with your organization for 20 years and they can share, the perspective of
Oh yeah, they can share all those milestones that you've hit that they, happened 20 years ago, but
yeah,
doesn't mean that it wasn't important.
exactly.
Um, Great. Great. All right. This question was asked during the session, and this question came from Anne. And she said, it was from the example where you were showing us the composite stories. And she said, if you're using a composite story, is it okay to show them as direct quotes since they are not actually direct quotes?
Um, I think that's again probably an it depends. I often do because, and the client often will just decide if they
Right.
feel that it's okay based on their own policies. But I
Yeah.
think, if you know that people have said things like this over time, then I often do make it in that spirit of sharing story and storytelling that, yeah, it is a direct quote, but I don't have a
Yeah.
name. So
I'm sorry, this is Anne. Can you just say a little bit more about that? So in some of the composite stories, it would have like a name, it would be a quote and have a name at the end, like Peter. So
yeah.
is that one client story that they've said those things or things like that? Or when you say composite, are you talking about multiple clients?
No, I'm talking about that sometimes we will use creative license and create Peter, who is, because often when we do share a real story, we still change their name and we change
Mm-hmm.
details anyway. So it's sort of the same thing, except we are creating a story that the client has said, yeah, there's somebody, like definitely someone like this exists somewhere, and we're sharing this story to create that feeling for the donor and let them know that this is the impact that their gift's going to have on someone. But no, that Peter doesn't exactly directly
Right.
exist and hasn't said those exact words.
I think that
Carly, what do you think about that? Because that sounds problematic to me.
Well, I was going to say that actually I liked when you had mentioned that maybe it's depending on your organization's policy, right? So one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is what's like an actionable thing that nonprofits can do that will be like help start their ethical storytelling practices. And I do think that having an ethical storytelling guide, and maybe that's part of your guide, maybe it's we as an organization have decided that composite stories written in this way, maybe there's a certain approval process, maybe there's a certain amount of people that have to sign off. I'm not sure exactly what that might look like, but I would think that if everybody has kind of decided this is something, there that we want to do in order to maybe keep our stories anonymous, but also represent multiple perspectives. I think that there's a way to do that. I do think so.
Yeah,
What
I mean,
even crediting it to a person as if it were the thing about putting it in quotes feels tricky to me, because it feels like we're saying someone has said this, but you're saying
Right.
if it's the kinds of things that clients say, that you could ascribe. Do you feel like that fits within the ethical storytelling practices that you use, Carly?
I would say that one thing, I'm not sure I've personally done this in my when I was working at a nonprofit, but I would say that if you're upfront with your donors or the upfront with the reader and say, these are examples, maybe these are composite stories, or maybe these are examples of the types of people that we often hear from, or the types of people that we are able to serve. I could see how, just being upfront and honest about it. I understand. I totally get what you're saying here. I think there is a way that you could do it.
Okay, thank
yeah,
you.
I definitely, I can understand what you're saying as well, but I also recognize that in this particular case, there's a lot of sensitivities, and and so for this client, this felt like the most authentic and real way to represent what's going on, and that these stories are happening without actually having someone's specific quotes involved.
Wow, great discussion. This is something that I'm going to think more about, because I do think this is such an interesting. I mean, there's so many things to talk about when it comes to ethical storytelling, right? And this is such an interesting, specific question that I would love to think more about, definitely. So thank you for bringing that up. We really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, wonderful. I do have a couple more questions,
Okay,
if you're
great.
ready.
I'm
So,
looking in the chat too, so we'll see what.
yeah, there's some great ones that just recently came into the chat. So we have, let me see here. I'm scrolling back up a little bit. Coming in from Sean. So Sean had said, this advice is mainly geared toward direct mail. But what are some things that you might have to maybe change if you're composing an email appeal instead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I know, like, in emails, often what happens is each email could be from a different perspective. So I've done email, like some of those campaigns, I've done email, like a series of
Right, like
emails,
a
and
drip
each
campaign,
email,
or yeah.
yeah, and each email comes from a different person and sharing a different perspective on the story. So one would come from Jacob, the boy who was helped, and then the next one was from his dad. Then another one might be from the CEO, but all referencing that same story and the same ask. Another might be from the program director. That sort of idea, I think, can work really well. And I've talked to a few organizations who have also implemented that and had a significant increase in their funds that they've raised, because they're just sharing different things. It's not always from the CEO or always from the executive director.
That's a great point. Also, I would say just, obviously I work at Memory Fox, but from my perspective, email is a really easy way where you can maybe convert some of those stories to video stories as well, right? Instead of just having it be something that you read, you also can do a voiceover, and you can speak the story, or you can share it, just in a little different way. That's just, just a way that you could do it a little differently in an email if you wanted to.
Totally, yeah, and I've written lots like that where it
Yeah.
shares, here's a great email, click here. My only caveat with that is, if you are doing this to raise funds, that you don't want to be sending them to a video that's not got a donation form on
Right.
it, right? Because anything that you
Don't
send
want to
someone
confuse them with the
else,
clicks.
yeah, so make sure that if you're sharing a video and you want them to donate, it's on a donation form, or there's a donate form nearby.
Such a good point. You want to make sure it's
Yeah,
very clear where they can send you the money, because that's what we want, right? Because we're doing
exactly.
appeals. We're gonna
Well,
have to get
if you
that
want to
money.
raise money, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Celine, would you like? Does it look like you're ready to ask a question? Oh, I see that you have a question in the chat. I didn't know if you wanted to ask a question, but I'll just go ahead and read it. we wrote, how is copywriting for fundraising different or not from sales at any other sector in which human persuasion is involved? Ooh, that's a good question. How does it differ from just like a regular sales pitch?
Well, I've not written for, you know, for profit as such, but I think for me, it comes down to the motivation, right? Like the motivation for giving usually is more of a compassionate, empathetic, I want to do something for somebody else. I want to change the world. I want to have an impact. Whereas sales for something else is you're buying something, you know, that impacts you or helps you in some way.
Right.
I think it is a bit selfish, the giving, like it is about making yourself probably feel good about helping someone else, but I think there's a lot more of that selfless. I don't know if you're familiar with Jen Shang and the Philanthropy Center research, but there's a lot of research they do about donor motivations for giving. And it comes, you know, there's a lot of keywords that come into it. And but a lot of it's about being loyal and caring and compassionate and kind. And the more that you can use those words to describe your donor, you're connecting with their self-identity as a compassionate person, a caring person. I am, like, again, back to Inside Out too, if anyone saw that, but
I am
it's
gonna
like
go see
your
that. I'm
identity.
definitely gonna go see that.
Yeah, it's identity
Yeah,
and
but
belief in who you are as a
if I can add to that, I would say, hey, this is Belen. I would say that in some sense it's the same persuasion key point in which you want something, you want your donors to ask to answer themselves what's in there for me. So what's in there for me? What is in there about me? It might be my compassion, my identity as a compassion, or my feeling wealthy or feeling loved, or whatever. You buy something for any reason, emotional reason. So in these terms of persuasion and making copywriting for fundraising about the other one, and being more,
100%.
like you say, interview, get to know them. You cannot write to them if you don't really know who's on the other side, and what's this person there for, because you are for them. And sometimes I think that we tend to fundraise because we need them to do our stuff, but they want to do their stuff through us. So it's like a slight thing, but when you write from one perspective or the other, like everything changes. And it's like this love raising work, like you showed very well. It's about caring and love. And we love race more than, but it's fun being,
100%.
and we have to know how to sell. I was a bit bad salesperson when I got into fundraising through writing, and I didn't know how to sell, how to get to know your client, how to everything. So very interesting.
Good
Thank you
point.
very much in any case.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Yeah, it's a really good point, because it's very much about that. It's not we, us as an organization. It's you know, what are you helping to do through us, the organization, right? So agreed.
I think we do have time for one more question. And this, let's see, there were several versions of this question that were submitted during registration, but it was actually also asked today. But there was a question about how would you, I don't remember the question off the top of my head because it was a while back, but let me put my own spin on it. But I think the question had something to do with how would you recommend avoiding trauma porn or poverty porn when it comes to interviewing style? Are there certain strategies to do that, or what are your recommendations there? Obviously, that's a very sensitive thing that we have historically seen that a lot of nonprofits kind of used to do. And of course, we are hoping that people will have some strategies to avoid that.
I mean, my only answer is that I try to be very much in the moment of the conversation that I'm having. And like, for instance, that example of the girl and the exploitation, that's a very traumatic, you know, triggering story. But the fact that there was the resolution and there was the completion of that story, like, I think that's what's important, is that we weren't just focusing on that. It was about the fact that there is this beautiful story at the end of it, I guess, is all that I can really say about that. I just try to be in the moment with each person that I'm speaking with and hear what they're saying from their heart in the interview and express that in the appeals that I'm writing, not kind of putting words into their mouth or anything like
Right.
that, but actually using what they've said, which, you know, I always get stuff from people that is way better than I could ever say. So I often just use the word, you know, use exactly what people have said in appeals, and it's just how you weave it in and how you weave the donor in and their impact into
Definitely.
the letter that really makes a difference. So I'm not
Yeah,
sure
and
if
I
that.
think we also, we talk a lot about, at Memory Fox, we talk a lot about, you know, even after it's maybe gone through that writing process and you've gone through the actual, like, you know, putting it on paper, designing, still sending it back to that person and seeing if this is the point they were trying to get across.
Oh,
And if
always,
they are
yeah.
still comfortable with the way that the story is being told, because, you know, I think you were kind of alluding to, like, as long as, like, the way that they would like to be spoken about is actually the strength-based way to talk about their story. So I think that that's really important.
Yeah, and I have had that where sometimes the nonprofit organization actually does want to minimize the words that the person has said in that very reason, not to be triggering or anything like that. But at the same time, the person that I've interviewed feels pretty strongly about wanting to express things the way that they want to express. So I know that's a whole other conversation and dynamic of how do you navigate that, right? When you're actually trying to make the person's words less powerful and less impactful than what they could be. So I don't know. I know that there's a lot of nuance, and I just try to be respectful of what everyone's wishes are and try to just stay authentic to what is true and real about the story as much as possible.
Well, I think that was a really lovely note to wrap up on. Thank you so much, everyone, for the wonderful questions. I mean, there are so many more. I wish we had another 4 hours. We could talk about all the rest of these questions, but thank you all for your time today. If anybody does want to stick around, I would love to tell you a little bit more about Memory Fox. But, you know, in terms of the actual webinar portion, thank you all for coming, and this will conclude the webinar. So Rachel, thanks for
Thank
coming.
you. Thanks
It's
so
been a
much.
pleasure. I'm going to go ahead
And
and
if,
just remove your spotlight. I don't want you to feel like you need
okay,
to
thanks.
hear my pitch. But if anybody wants to stick around, I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen. If you will just give me a moment, I'll go ahead and do that. I am excited to share with you all some more about Memory Fox. Thank you for coming today. I'm going to get back to, all right. Now, even though it's been several years, let's see if I did this correctly. Okay. I believe I am, yes, okay, great. So, when it comes to Memory Fox and when it comes to nonprofit professionals and all the great work that you're doing, we always love to ask people, you know, if someone asks you, what is your mission? Are you able to show them? And what we mean by that is, I imagine that you all get to talk to wonderful people all the time and tell them about the way of how you would write your mission down or how it's listed on your website. But do you have the photos and videos that you can actually use to convey your message in a compelling visual way? And then I would love to say, here, if you're finding yourself saying no to that question, then what is stopping you? When we talk with nonprofit professionals like you, we find that there are really 4 pain points. Number 1, collecting content from our community is like pulling teeth. We talked a little bit about that in the session today. Number 2, organizing content is frustrating and very time consuming. I know I've been there where things are saved in all different folders. They're saved on one person's computer and you can't find things. You know, it can be very frustrating. Next, the third pain point is we need a more efficient and modern way to share our story. And finally, I struggle with collecting community stories ethically. So what we did here at MemoryFox is we actually built a technology platform that addresses all 4 of these pain points head on. So first, we have this great process that is sort of a collect, organize, and share. And I'm going to go into every single one of those. But the really interesting thing that we love to talk about lately that our new friend Ann alluded to earlier is ethical storytelling, because we do believe that nonprofits have been really given this impossible task where they have to compete in the attention economy along all of these for-profits, but they also have to remain true to ethical standards for authentic storytelling. And when we made our ethical storytelling report, we wanted to see if others felt that way. We actually found that 58% of nonprofit professionals said that they actually struggle with wanting to collect stories from their community while doing no harm. So how do we address these 4 pain points? Number 1, we have a great collection tool. So the way that our collection tool works, you can actually scan this QR code if you want to see how it works in real time. You can pull out your phone and go ahead and scan that. But basically what happens is we help you build branded campaigns that you distribute directly to your community. So they're simply going to receive that on their phone or on their desktop, and then they're going to go ahead, click the link, open it up, and then they can submit their photos, videos, and written testimonials directly to you at the nonprofit. The really cool thing about the collect portion of our system is that there's no download or login required. So people don't have to have an app on their phone. They don't have to have storage on their phone. They don't have to do a login. They don't have to remember a password. Also, we really prioritize capturing contact info and also managing the consent up front. So if you need to follow up with somebody about a different way you're planning to use their story that you would like to get consent from, it's very easy to do so. And finally, there is a way to quickly redirect back to your website so people don't even know they're using MemoryFox. Instead, they're going to go right to your website, and maybe they'll even make another gift. In terms of organizing, we help you build your MemoryFox story bank. So when they submit their photos and videos, written testimonials to you, they actually automatically populate in your MemoryFox story bank. Once they're in your story bank, you are able to tag them in any way that makes sense for your nonprofit. We sort of recommend maybe by program, maybe by event, maybe by department, or maybe how you're planning to use the content. You also can bulk upload all of your existing content, so it's all in one place for you, and you get to enjoy unlimited storage. We really don't want to put any cap on all the great stories that you could tell, so unlimited storage. In terms of sharing, we have a lot of tools, a lot of features that we built that actually help you with the sharing portion of your story. So as you can see from the graphic, we are integrated with Canva, which is wonderful because that means that when someone submits a photo or a video to your story bank, it's actually going to automatically go to your Canva account as well. So you can just drag and drop and not worry about the upload, download craziness there. We also have a video editor inside the platform, so you can trim, you can combine videos. We have a story builder, which makes it so you can have a quick way to share several stories in one web page. And you always have the option to download the high quality original. So to me, this might not seem like a very fancy feature, but as someone who used to try to collect stories and people would try to text me or email me and it'd be too small or too big, or it would be thumbnail size and it ended up being something I couldn't use, being able to download the high quality original is something that is really, really great feature. And then in terms of ethical storytelling, we actually have built all of these several features that actually emphasize the importance of being ethical when it comes to your storytelling. And for that reason, MemoryFox is the #1 ethical storytelling technology tool out there. If you have not read our ethical storytelling report yet, you can head to our website and it'll be on our ethical storytelling page. But in terms of actual features that are built into MemoryFox, we have the accessibility, which basically just means that anybody has the opportunity to share a story where and when they are comfortable. So instead of bringing them in maybe for like a traditional style interview, they can do it from the comfort of their own home using their own device. We also allow for you to create unique campaign descriptions. So this is really helpful because then people can truly understand how their story is going to be used prior to making a submission. I already talked about consent a little bit, but there is a built-in editable consent form as well as a consent removal option, so people can always take back their story if they no longer would like it to be used. In terms of privacy, MemoryFox never owns any of your content. And finally, we have customizable calls to action. So that's a way where you can craft prompts using the language that your community prefers. And it's always, so therefore you know that it's going to be the strength-based language. So that's just me going really quick overview of Memory Fox. Last thing I will let you know is that we do operate on an equitable pricing model. So it is based on your $9.90. So we would, and because really we just believe everybody has great stories to tell, and we want to find a way for you all to tell them. So if you are interested in booking a time where you could figure out exactly what ethical or what storytelling with Memory Fox might look like, go ahead and scan that QR code. Spend some time with one of our experts. They would love to talk to you. And with that, I, again, just thank you all for sticking around. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I invite you all to, join us later this month. We're going to, oh, what do you got? Question here. Can you share the link for this sample? Yes, I can. Let me go back here and get that link for you, and I'll drop it in before I hop off here. Or you know what? Actually, I will send it in the follow-up email when I send the recording. I will do that as well as a couple of the other resources that I mentioned here. Okay. Thank you all for joining us for our July webinar. We are doing a webinar, co-webinar with our friends at Volunteer Match. So if you haven't signed up for that, we'd love to see you again in a couple weeks. And enjoy the rest of your day.